All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into one of history's most fascinating and, honestly, most paradoxical political experiments.
So here's the big question they were facing, right? Can an empire, one that's forged in brutal, bloody conquest, actually be ruled by peace and morality? It's a question that kind of flips everything we think we know about power on its head. Let's see how they tried to answer it.
Okay, so before we get to the big twist in the story, we really need to understand the beginning. To get just how revolutionary Ashoka's whole deal was, you have to see the violent, ruthless foundation his empire was built on.
The Mauryan dynasty, you see, was born from nonstop military conquest. It all started with its founder, Chandragupta, who basically carved out a kingdom from the chaos Alexander the Great left behind. And from that point on, the dynasty really only knew one way to grow: the sword. Ruler after ruler just kept pushing the borders out, creating this incredibly powerful, centralized state that dominated the entire Indian subcontinent.
But here's the thing, it wasn't just about brute force. Nope, this was a highly organized system. They drew on famous texts like the Arthashastra to create this intricate bureaucracy designed for total control, for sucking out resources, and for keeping an eye on everyone. From the king at the very top, who was all-powerful, down to the governors running the provinces, the whole thing was set up to be a well-oiled machine of imperial power.
All right, so let's shift gears. We're moving on to the reign of Chandragupta's grandson, the man himself, Ashoka. And we're going to talk about the single, bloody event that would change everything for him and for his empire forever.
So Ashoka gets handed the keys to this massive, conquest-driven empire. And in his early years, he was every bit the classic Mauryan ruler you'd expect. He was eager to finish what his grandfather started and bring the entire subcontinent under his thumb. There was just one major kingdom left standing, Kalinga, over on the east coast of India. So Ashoka unleashes the full might of the Mauryan military to crush this final pocket of resistance. And let me tell you, the battle was absolutely brutal, a total bloodbath. But with the Mauryan war machine at his back, well, the outcome was never really in doubt. He won. But that victory, wow, it came at a staggering cost. As Ashoka looked out over the battlefield, the sheer scale of the carnage, 100,000 people killed, so many more taken away, it didn't lead to some big celebration. Instead, it triggered a profound and deeply personal crisis of conscience.
And his change of heart was just profound. In his own words, which he had carved into stone for everyone to see, he expressed this deep, deep remorse. And then he did something absolutely unprecedented in all of world history. The victorious emperor, at the very peak of his military triumph, renounced war. Now, this remorse Ashoka felt, it wasn't just some private feeling he kept to himself. No way. It became public policy. He dedicated the rest of his life and his reign to a whole new philosophy of governing, a new way of ruling that he called Dhamma.
So what was this Dhamma exactly? Well, the simple definition is a moral law, a code of ethical conduct that's all about social responsibility. But to really get it, you have to understand what it wasn't. See, even though Ashoka himself converted to Buddhism, Dhamma wasn't a religion he was trying to force on his incredibly diverse empire. Think of it more like a public moral philosophy, a universal ethical code that could apply to anyone, no matter what they believed. The whole point was about how people treated each other, not about which gods they prayed to. And these principles, they were the very foundation of his attempt to replace conquest by war with what he called conquest by piety. What a radical idea, right? To hold an entire empire together, not with armies and spies, but with shared ethical principles.
Okay, so you've got this great idea. But how do you actually roll out a moral code across a subcontinent-sized empire? In an age without TV or the internet? Well, Ashoka's solution was just as innovative as his philosophy.
He literally turned the landscape itself into his medium. He launched what was basically an ancient public messaging campaign. He had his edicts carved onto massive stone pillars and giant rock faces, and then he placed them in busy cities and along major trade routes, places where everybody would see them. And the tone of these messages, it was completely revolutionary. This wasn't the voice of some distant, scary emperor. It was personal. It was paternal.
He was totally reframing his role from conqueror to guardian, speaking directly to his people like a father talking to his children.
And this wasn't just talk, just words on a rock. He backed it all up with action. He created a whole new class of government officials whose job was to travel the empire and promote these principles. He led by example, giving up his violent royal hunts and instead going on Dhamma tours to actually meet his people. And he invested a ton in public works, hospitals, roads, wells, that benefited everyone. This was a massive, top-down effort to fundamentally change the whole relationship between the ruler and the ruled. Which brings us right back to that big question we started with. Could an empire built on conquest really survive on a diet of peace and morality?
For centuries, a lot of historians argued exactly that Ashoka's peaceful policies weakened the military and just left the empire vulnerable. But when you take a closer look, the reality seems to be a lot more complex. The empire didn't just collapse overnight. After Ashoka died, a whole combination of factors started to kick in. His successors, for one, just weren't as capable as he was. Then there was the huge cost of keeping up that massive army and bureaucracy, which, by the way, Ashoka never actually disbanded. That led to a financial crisis. And way out on the fringes of the empire, local governors were becoming oppressive, which sparked revolts.
And so, this noble experiment in moral governance came to an end in the most classic way you can imagine, a military coup. The empire was once again taken over by rulers who believed in the power of the sword, not the power of piety.
But here's the amazing thing. While the Mauryan Empire itself fell, Ashoka's ideas, they didn't. His legacy lived on. Fast forward centuries later, when a newly independent India was looking for symbols to define itself, who did they look back to? They looked back to Ashoka. His lion capital became the national emblem, and the wheel from his pillars, the wheel of Dhamma, was placed right in the center of the nation's flag. And so we're left with this great paradox. Was Ashoka a naive idealist who threw away the practical realities of power and doomed his own dynasty? Or was he an incredible visionary, trying out a form of government so radical, so advanced, that maybe the world still hasn't quite caught up to it? That question, well, it remains one of the most compelling puzzles in all of ancient history.